The morning sun painted the quiet streets of Oakwood Hills in golden light. It was the kind of peaceful Saturday that most people in this fancy neighborhood loved. Big houses sat behind perfect green lawns and expensive cars slept in driveways. Everything looked picture-perfect, like something from a magazine. Dr. James Carter was halfway through his morning run when he decided to take a different route. He had been living in Oakwood Hills for exactly 1 week now, and he was still getting used to his new surroundings. The 34-year-old surgeon had worked hard to afford a house in this area. After years of long hours at the hospital and countless sleepless nights, he finally had a place where his 8-year-old daughter Lucy could grow up safely. James wiped the sweat from his forehead as he jogged down Pine Street. His running shoes hit the pavement in a steady rhythm. He had always been an early riser, a habit he picked up during his medical training. Even on weekends, he was up before sunrise, making the most of his free time before Lucy woke up. As he turned the corner onto his street, James could see his new house. It was a beautiful 2-story home with white shutters and a red front door. Lucy had picked out that red door herself when they went house hunting. She said it looked happy and welcoming. James smiled, thinking about how excited she had been when they got the keys last weekend. But as he got closer to his house, James realized he had a problem. In his rush to start his run, he had forgotten to grab his house keys. They were sitting on the kitchen counter, right where he had left them after coming home from the grocery store the night before. He stopped at his front door and checked his pockets, hoping maybe he had brought them without thinking. No luck. James looked around, trying to figure out what to do. Lucy was still sleeping inside, and he didn't want to wake her up by banging on the door. She had stayed up late the night before, unpacking her toys in her new room. He walked around to the back of the house, thinking maybe he had left a window open. The morning air was cool against his skin, and he could hear birds singing in the big oak tree in his backyard. He found an unlocked window on the side of the house. It was small, but he thought he could squeeze through it. James looked around to make sure no one was watching. The last thing he wanted was to look suspicious in his new neighborhood. Everything seemed quiet, so he started to work on opening the window wider. Across the street, Linda Peterson was in her kitchen making coffee. She was a 42-year-old real estate agent who knew every house and family in the neighborhood. Linda took pride in keeping an eye on things. She always said it was important for neighbors to look out for each other. Her 11-year-old son, David, was still asleep upstairs, enjoying his Saturday morning. Linda glanced out her kitchen window while waiting for her coffee to brew. What she saw made her freeze. A tall black man in running clothes was trying to get into the house across the street. The house that had been empty for months until recently. Linda felt her heart start beating faster. She had heard that someone new had moved in, but she had never seen them. In her mind, this looked like someone trying to break in. She moved closer to the window, trying to get a better look. The man was definitely trying to open a window. He kept looking around, which made Linda even more suspicious. Why would someone look around like that unless they were doing something wrong? She had watched enough crime shows to know that burglars often check to make sure no one was watching. Linda's hands started shaking as she reached for her phone. She had never had to call the police before, but this seemed serious. What if this person was dangerous? What if he got inside and then tried to break into other houses? She thought about David sleeping upstairs and felt a wave of fear wash over her. Without thinking it through, Linda dialed 911. Her voice was shaky when the operator answered. "Hello. I need to report a break-in in progress," she said, her eyes still fixed on James. "There's a man trying to get into a house on Pine Street. He's been there for several minutes trying to open windows." The operator asked for more details. Linda gave them the address and described what she was seeing. She mentioned that the man was black, which she thought might be important information for the police. In her mind, she was being a good citizen, protecting her neighborhood from crime. "Officers are on their way," the operator told her. "Please stay inside and don't try to approach the person." Linda hung up and continued watching from her window. She felt proud of herself for taking action. This was exactly the kind of thing neighbors should do for each other. She imagined telling the story later to her friends, how she had helped stop a break-in before anything was stolen. Meanwhile, James had managed to get the window open wide enough to climb through. It was awkward and embarrassing, but he didn't have much choice. He squeezed through the opening and landed softly on his living room floor. The house was quiet except for the sound of Lucy's gentle breathing coming from upstairs. He felt relieved to be inside his own home. James went to the kitchen and grabbed his keys from the counter. He also got a glass of water, feeling thirsty after his run. As he stood in his kitchen drinking water, he had no idea that police cars were already heading his way. He had no idea that his new neighbor across the street was watching his every move, convinced that she was witnessing a crime. He walked to the front door, planning to go back outside and finish his run with a walk around the block. But as he reached for the door handle, he heard something that made his blood run cold. The sound of car doors slamming outside, followed by heavy footsteps on his front porch. Then came the loud, authoritative knocking that every parent fears. "Police! Open the door." James felt confused and scared. What could the police possibly want? He hadn't done anything wrong. With shaking hands, he unlocked his front door and slowly opened it. Two police officers stood on his porch, their hands resting on their belts. One was older with gray hair, the other looked young and nervous. "Sir, we received a report of a break-in at this address," the older officer said, his voice serious and professional. "Can you tell us what you're doing here?" James felt the world spin around him. A break-in? This was his house. This was his home. The place where he planned to build a life with his daughter. The place he had worked so hard to afford. "Officer, I think there's been a mistake," James said carefully, trying to keep his voice calm. "This is my house. I live here with my daughter." The younger officer looked skeptical. "Do you have any identification that shows this address?" James nodded and slowly reached for his wallet, making sure to move carefully. He had heard too many stories about situations like this going wrong. He handed over his driver's license, which clearly showed his name and address. The officers looked at the license, then at James, then at the house number. The older officer's expression began to change as he realized what had happened. "Sir, someone called and reported seeing a man trying to break into this house through a window," he explained. "Can you tell us why you were outside the window?" James felt a mix of embarrassment and anger. "I went for a run and forgot my keys. I had to climb through my own window to get back inside. My daughter is sleeping upstairs." As if on cue, Lucy appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Daddy, what's happening? Why are there police here?" The sight of the little girl made everything clear to both officers. This was obviously a father and daughter, not a burglar. The older officer looked embarrassed and apologetic. "I'm sorry, sir. There's been a misunderstanding. Someone saw you at the window and thought you were breaking in. We had to respond to the call." James felt angry but tried to stay calm in front of Lucy. "I understand you were doing your job, officers. Thank you for keeping the neighborhood safe." After the police left, James stood in his doorway looking across the street. He wondered which neighbor had called the police on him. He wondered if this was the kind of welcome he could expect in his new neighborhood. Most of all, he wondered if moving to Oakwood Hills had been a mistake after all. The rest of Saturday felt heavy for James. He tried to focus on unpacking boxes with Lucy, but his mind kept going back to the morning incident. Every time he looked out his front window, he wondered which neighbor had called the police. He felt like he was being watched, judged before anyone even knew who he was. Lucy noticed her dad seemed upset, but she was too young to understand what had really happened. She just knew that police had come to their door, and it had made her daddy sad. She tried to cheer him up by showing him how she had arranged her stuffed animals on her new bed, but James was having trouble focusing on anything. By Sunday afternoon, James had made a decision. He couldn't live in a neighborhood where people were afraid of him without even knowing him. He had to try to fix this situation before it got worse. The only way to do that was to be brave and introduce himself to his neighbors, especially whoever had made that phone call. James put on his nicest shirt and walked across the street. He had noticed a woman in the kitchen window of the house directly across from his. She had been there both mornings when he left for his runs, and she was probably the one who had the best view of his front door. If anyone had called the police, it was likely her. His heart was beating fast as he knocked on the front door. He had practiced what he was going to say, but now that he was standing there, all his planned words seemed to disappear from his mind. After a few moments, he heard footsteps inside. The door opened slowly, and a woman with short brown hair appeared. She looked to be in her early 40s, and she was wearing a nervous expression. The moment she saw James, her face turned red with embarrassment. She knew exactly why he was there. "Hello," James said, trying to smile despite feeling uncomfortable. "I'm Dr. James Carter." I just moved into the house across the street with my daughter Lucy. Linda felt like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Standing in front of her was not a criminal or a dangerous person. This was clearly an educated, professional man who was trying to be polite to her even though she had done something terrible to him. I'm Linda Peterson, she managed to say. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. I live here with my son David. There was an awkward silence as both of them tried to figure out what to say next. James could see in Linda's face that she was the one who had called the police. Her guilty expression told him everything he needed to know. I think there might have been some confusion yesterday morning, James said carefully. He was trying to be kind even though he felt hurt and angry inside. The police came to my house because someone thought I was breaking in. Linda's eyes filled with tears. She felt so ashamed of what she had done. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I saw you at the window and I didn't know you lived there. I thought someone was trying to break into the empty house. But even as she said it, Linda knew that wasn't the whole truth. She had seen James looking around, and something about him had made her automatically think dangerous instead of neighbor who might need help. She was starting to realize that her reaction had been based on something much deeper than just concern about burglary. I understand. You were trying to protect your neighborhood. James replied, I appreciate that you care about keeping everyone safe. I want the same thing for my daughter. James reached into his pocket and pulled out one of his business cards. I'm a pediatric surgeon at Children's Hospital downtown. If you or your son ever need anything, medical or otherwise, please don't hesitate to ask. Linda took the card with shaking hands. The words pediatric surgeon hit her like a punch to the stomach. This man saved children's lives for a living, and she had called the police on him for trying to get into his own house. She felt sick thinking about how wrong she had been. Dr. Carter, I don't know what to say. I feel terrible about what happened. I should have come over and introduced myself when I saw you were new to the neighborhood. James nodded. We all make mistakes, Mrs. Peterson. I just hope we can start over and be good neighbors to each other. As James walked back to his house, Linda stood in her doorway watching him go. She felt like the worst person in the world. How could she have been so quick to assume the worst about someone? How could she have been so afraid of a man she had never even met? That evening, David noticed his mom seemed upset during dinner. He was 11 years old and smart enough to pick up on his mother's mood even when she tried to hide it. Mom, what's wrong? You've been weird all day. Linda looked at her son and realized this might be a good opportunity to teach him something important. She had made a mistake, but maybe something good could come from it. David, you know how we moved to this neighborhood because it's safe and has good schools? Yeah, so? Well, sometimes when people look different from us or come from different places, we might feel scared or suspicious without a good reason. Yesterday, I did something I'm not proud of. Linda told David about what had happened, explaining it in a way that an 11-year-old could understand. She talked about how she had made assumptions about Dr. Carter based on how he looked rather than who he actually was. David listened carefully. So you called the cops on our neighbor just because he's black? The directness of his question made Linda wince. It's more complicated than that, but yes, I think that's exactly what I did. And it was wrong. That's really messed up, Mom. I know, honey. I know it was wrong. That's why I'm telling you about it. I want you to learn from my mistake and be better than I was. David thought about this for a while. Maybe we should do something nice for them. Like bring them cookies or something. Linda smiled for the first time all day. Her son's kind heart gave her hope. That's a wonderful idea. Maybe we can bake something tomorrow. Over the next few days, Linda found herself paying attention to James and Lucy in a completely different way. She watched James leave for work every morning in his professional clothes carrying a medical bag. She saw him come home tired but always ready to play with Lucy in their backyard. She watched him help Lucy with her homework at their kitchen table, visible through their window. She began to see them not as strangers or threats, but as a hard-working father and his sweet daughter. She noticed that James always waved at other neighbors when he saw them, even though most of them didn't wave back. She saw that Lucy had started riding her bike up and down the street, looking lonely because none of the other neighborhood kids had come over to play with her. Linda realized that by calling the police, she might have made it harder for James and Lucy to feel welcome in their new neighborhood. Word traveled fast in places like Oakwood Hills, and she worried that other neighbors might have heard about the incident and formed their own unfair opinions. On Wednesday evening, Linda and David walked across the street with a plate of homemade chocolate chip cookies. David had insisted on making them from scratch, saying store-bought cookies weren't good enough for an apology. When James opened the door, he seemed surprised to see them. Lucy appeared behind him, curious about the visitors. "Hi, Dr. Carter," Linda said, feeling nervous again. "David and I made these for you and Lucy. We wanted to welcome you properly to the neighborhood." Lucy's eyes lit up when she saw the cookies. "Dad, can we invite them in?" James hesitated for a moment, then stepped back and opened the door wider. "Of course. Please come in." Linda was amazed by how warm and welcoming their home felt. There were pictures of James and Lucy at various places: the beach, a baseball game, graduation ceremonies. The house felt full of love and happiness. David and Lucy hit it off immediately. They were close in age, and David was excited to have a new kid in the neighborhood to play with. They started talking about video games in school while the adults talked in the kitchen. "Dr. Carter," Linda began, "I want you to know how sorry I am about Saturday, not just because I was wrong, but because I realized I judged you based on things that don't matter, things that shouldn't matter." James appreciated her honesty. "Thank you for saying that, Linda. It means a lot that you're willing to admit it. I keep thinking about what would have happened if David had been the one climbing through a window because he forgot his keys. No one would have called the police on him." James nodded. "Probably not. But the important thing is that you recognize it now. That's the first step toward making things better." As Linda and David got ready to leave, Lucy asked if David could come over the next day to play in their backyard. David looked excited about the idea, and Linda felt her heart lift. Maybe her mistake could lead to something positive after all. Walking back across the street, David looked up at his mom. "Dr. Carter seems really nice. And Lucy is cool too." "Yes, they are," Linda agreed. "I'm glad I got to meet them properly." But even as she said it, Linda knew she still had work to do. She had damaged James's first impression of their neighborhood, and she wondered how she could help fix that. She also wondered how many other neighbors might be making the same unfair assumptions she had made. That night, Linda lay in bed thinking about unconscious bias and privilege and all the things she had never really had to think about before. She realized that this experience was teaching her something important about the world and about herself. She just hoped it wasn't too late to make things right. 3 weeks had passed since the cookie visit, and life in Oakwood Hills had settled into a comfortable routine for everyone. James and Linda had started greeting each other with friendly waves when they saw each other in their driveways. David and Lucy had become fast friends, spending most afternoons playing together in one of their backyards. James felt grateful that at least one neighbor had made an effort to get to know him. Still, he noticed that most other people in the neighborhood kept their distance. Some would nod politely if they had to, but nobody else had come over to introduce themselves. He tried not to let it bother him, focusing instead on making Lucy feel at home. Linda, meanwhile, had been doing some soul-searching. She had started reading books about race and privilege, trying to understand her own biases better. She had even talked to some of her friends about what happened, though most of them seemed uncomfortable with the conversation. It was becoming clear to her that the problem wasn't just her own, it was bigger than that. On Thursday afternoon, David was outside with his new mountain bike. His dad had bought it for him the previous weekend, and David was eager to show off his riding skills. The bike was red and silver with thick tires and multiple gears. David felt like he could conquer the world on that bike. Lucy was at her after-school art class and James was still at the hospital, so David was riding around the neighborhood with 2 other boys from his grade, Alex and Ryan. They lived a few streets over and had come to check out the creek that ran behind some of the houses in Oakwood Hills. "I bet you can't jump your bike over the creek," Alex challenged David as they stood looking at the water. The creek was about 4 feet wide at this spot, with muddy banks on both sides. David looked at the distance and felt his heart race with excitement. "Are you kidding? That's easy. Watch this," Ryan shook his head. "Dude, I don't think that's a good idea. What if you don't make it?" But David was already backing up his bike to get a running start. He was 11 years old and felt invincible. Plus, he wanted to impress his friends with his new bike and his courage. In his mind, jumping the creek would make him the coolest kid in the group. "Don't be such a baby, Ryan," David said, trying to sound braver than he felt. "This bike can handle anything. He pedaled hard toward the creek, building up speed. The wind rushed through his hair, and for a moment David felt like he was flying. But as he hit the small dirt ramp by the creek's edge, something went wrong. His front wheel didn't lift high enough, and instead of soaring over the water, David and his bike crashed hard into the far bank of the creek. The sound was terrible, a mix of metal scraping against rocks and David's scream of pain. His bike landed on top of him, the handlebars twisting at an odd angle. David's left arm was bent in a way that arms shouldn't bend, and blood was flowing from a deep cut on his forehead. Alex and Ryan stood frozen for a moment, shocked by what they had just witnessed. David wasn't moving and his eyes were closed. The boys had never seen anything so scary in their lives. "David! David, wake up!" Alex shouted, but there was no response. Ryan started crying. "We need to get help. We need to call someone." The two boys looked at each other, panic setting in. They were too young to have cell phones, and they were behind the houses where nobody could see them. Alex made a quick decision. "You stay with David. Don't move him. I'm going to run and get his mom." Alex sprinted toward the front of the neighborhood, his legs pumping as fast as they could carry him. He ran up to Linda's front door and started pounding on it with both fists. "Mrs. Peterson. Mrs. Peterson, help." David got hurt really bad. Linda was in her home office working on some real estate contracts when she heard the frantic knocking. She had never heard Alex sound so scared. She ran to the door and threw it open. "Alex, what's wrong? What happened?" "David crashed his bike. He's bleeding and he won't wake up." "He's by the creek behind the houses." Linda felt the world tilt. Her son was hurt, possibly seriously hurt, and she had no idea how bad it was. She grabbed her phone and followed Alex as he led her toward the creek, calling 911 as she ran. 911, what's your emergency?" "My son has been in a bike accident," Linda said, trying to keep her voice steady while running. "He's unconscious and bleeding. We're at the creek behind Pine Street in Oakwood Hills." "Ma'am, how old is your son?" "He's 11. "Please hurry. I don't know how badly he's hurt." When Linda reached the creek, she saw a sight that would haunt her forever. David was lying motionless with his bike on top of him. There was blood pooled around his head and his left arm looked completely wrong. Ryan was kneeling nearby, crying and saying David's name over and over. Linda carefully moved the bike off her son, afraid to touch him but needing to see how bad his injuries were. David's breathing was shallow and uneven. His face was pale except for the blood from the cut on his forehead. The arm injury looked serious. Linda could tell it was broken in at least one place, maybe more. "David, honey, can you hear me?" "Mommy's here," she whispered, but David didn't respond. Linda looked around desperately. The ambulance would take at least 20 minutes to get there, maybe longer since they were behind the houses where the emergency vehicles couldn't easily reach. 20 minutes felt like forever when your child was lying unconscious and bleeding. Then Linda remembered something. Dr. James Carter lived across the street. He was a surgeon, a pediatric surgeon who worked with children every day. He would know what to do. He would know how to help David. Linda felt embarrassed thinking about asking James for help. She was the woman who had called the police on him just a month ago. She was the neighbor who had treated him with suspicion and fear. Why would he want to help her after what she had done? But as she looked at David's still form, Linda realized that her pride and embarrassment didn't matter at all. Her son needed help, and James was the most qualified person she knew to give it. She had to swallow her pride and ask for help from the man she had wronged. "Alex, Ryan, stay with David," she ordered the boys. "Don't try to move him. I'm going to get Dr. Carter." Linda ran faster than she had ever run in her life. She sprinted across the neighborhood and up James's front porch, pounding on his door with both fists. "Please be home," she prayed. "Please, please be home." After what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, James opened the door. He was still in his scrubs from the hospital, having just gotten home from a long surgery. He looked surprised to see Linda, especially in such a panicked state. "Linda, what's wrong?" "James, please," she gasped, barely able to catch her breath. "David, my son. He crashed his bike. He's hurt really bad. He won't wake up. You're a doctor, can you help him?" James didn't hesitate for even a second. "Where is he?" "By the creek behind the houses. There's blood and his arm looks broken and he's not waking up." James was already moving, grabbing his medical bag from the hall closet. "Show me the way." "Has someone called 911? "Yes, but they said it would take 20 minutes for the ambulance to get there." As they ran toward the creek, James asked Linda quick questions about what had happened. How fast was David going? How did he fall? How long had he been unconscious? Linda answered as best she could, but her mind was focused on one terrible thought. What if David was hurt worse than he looked? When they reached the creek, James immediately dropped to his knees beside David. His doctor training kicked in, and his hands began moving with practiced efficiency. He checked David's pulse, looked at his pupils with a small flashlight, and gently examined the head wound. Alex, Ryan, I need you boys to step back and give me room to work, James said calmly. His voice was steady and professional, which helped calm everyone down a little bit. Linda watched in amazement as James worked. His hands were gentle but confident as he checked David's injuries. She could see why he was successful at his job. He had a way of projecting calm competence even in a crisis. How bad is it? Linda whispered, afraid to hear the answer. He has a concussion, definitely. The arm is broken, but that's fixable. The head injury is what concerns me most. We need to keep his neck stable and get him to a hospital as soon as possible. James looked around and saw some straight branches nearby. He quickly fashioned a makeshift splint for David's arm using the branches and his belt. Then he took off his jacket and carefully positioned it under David's neck to keep his head from moving. Linda, I need you to help me. We can't wait for the ambulance. I'm going to carry David to my car and we're going to drive him to Children's Hospital ourselves. Can you call the hospital and tell them we're coming? Linda nodded, grateful to have something useful to do. As James carefully lifted her son, David's eyes fluttered open for just a moment. Mom, he whispered weakly. I'm here, baby. Dr. Carter is going to take care of you. David's eyes found James's face. Even through his pain and confusion, he managed a small smile. Hi, Dr. Carter. Hello, David. We're going to get you fixed up, okay? Just stay still for me. As James carried David toward his car with Linda running alongside them, she realized something important. This man, whom she had treated so badly, was now risking everything to save her son. He could have hesitated, could have made excuses, could have let her deal with the emergency on her own. Instead, he had dropped everything to help, showing her a level of kindness and compassion that she wasn't sure she deserved. In that moment, Linda understood that she was seeing true character. Not the character she had imagined based on fear and prejudice, but the real character of a man who put a child's life above everything else, even his own hurt feelings. The ride to the hospital would test all of them, but Linda already knew that whatever happened next, James Carter had proven himself to be exactly the kind of neighbor and person she should have recognized from the very beginning. James carried David to his car with the careful precision of someone who had done this many times before. But this time was different. This wasn't just another patient. This was his neighbor's child, a boy who had become friends with his own daughter. The weight of responsibility felt heavier than usual. Linda ran ahead to open the car doors, her hands shaking as she tried to help in any way she could. James gently placed David in the back seat, making sure to keep his neck supported. David's eyes were open now, but they looked unfocused and confused. Mom, what happened? Why does my head hurt so much? David asked weakly. You had an accident with your bike, honey, but you're going to be okay. Dr. Carter is taking us to the hospital. James slid into the driver's seat and immediately called the hospital on his hands-free phone. Linda got in the back next to David, holding his good hand and trying not to cry. This is Dr. Carter, James said when someone answered at the hospital. I'm bringing in an 11-year-old boy with head trauma and a compound fracture of the left arm. ETA is 15 minutes. I need a trauma team ready. The voice on the other end was professional and calm. Copy that, Dr. Carter. We'll have everything ready. What's the patient's condition? Conscious but disoriented. Possible concussion. Definitely needs imaging. The arm fracture is severe but stable for now. I've got him immobilized. As James drove through traffic, Linda watched him work. Even while driving, he kept checking on David through the rearview mirror. He asked David simple questions. What's your name? How old are you? Do you remember what day it is? To monitor his consciousness level. Dr. Carter, Linda said quietly. I don't know how to thank you for this. Don't thank me yet, James replied, his eyes focused on the road. Let's just get David to the hospital safely. But Linda could hear something in his voice, kindness mixed with determination. This man was giving everything he had to save her son, and she knew she had done nothing to deserve this level of care and compassion. David started to get more agitated as they drove, which James explained was actually a good sign. It means he's becoming more alert. That's what we want to see. My arm really hurts, David complained, trying to move it. I know it does, buddy. Try to keep it still for me. We're almost there, and they're going to give you something for the pain. Linda found herself studying James as he drove. She had never really looked at him before, not really. She had seen him as a stranger, then as a threat, then as someone to be guilty about. But now she was seeing him as a skilled doctor, a compassionate person, and someone who cared deeply about helping others. "How do you stay so calm?" she asked him. James glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Training mostly. But also panic doesn't help anyone. David needs me to think clearly right now." They pulled up to the emergency entrance of Children's Hospital, and immediately a team of medical professionals surrounded the car. James had obviously called ahead with more details, because they seemed to know exactly what they were dealing with. "Dr. Carter, good to see you," said a young doctor who appeared to be leading the team, "even if it's under these circumstances." "Hi, Dr. Rodriguez, this is David Peterson, 11 years old. Bike accident about 30 minutes ago. He was unconscious for at least 10 minutes, possibly longer." The medical team transferred David to a gurney with practiced efficiency. Linda tried to stay close to her son, but there were so many people around him that she felt lost and in the way. James noticed her confusion and gently took her arm. "Linda, they need to take David for immediate tests and x-rays. There's nothing you can do right now except let them work. They're very good at what they do. But what if he needs surgery? What if something goes wrong? I should be with him. You can't go into the operating room even if you were his doctor," James explained patiently. "The best thing you can do for David right now is stay out of the way and let the medical team do their job." Linda felt helpless and scared. She had never been in a situation like this before, and she didn't know how to handle the waiting and uncertainty. James seemed to understand this. "Come on," he said, guiding her toward the family waiting room. "Let's sit down and I'll explain what's likely to happen next." The waiting room was painted in cheerful colors that were supposed to make families feel better, but Linda barely noticed. She felt like she was in a nightmare that she couldn't wake up from. Just a few hours ago, her biggest worry was finishing her real estate contracts. Now her son was somewhere in this hospital, possibly fighting for his life. "Will you tell me honestly how bad you think it is?" Linda asked James after they had been sitting for a few minutes. James considered his words carefully. "The head injury is concerning, but David was conscious and talking during the drive here, which is encouraging. His responses to questions were appropriate, even if he was confused about some things. The broken arm looks worse than it probably is. Broken bones heal well in kids his age. So you think he'll be okay?" "I think David has a very good chance of making a full recovery. But Linda, I can't make you any promises. Head injuries are unpredictable sometimes." Linda started crying then, really crying for the first time since the accident. All the fear and guilt and helplessness came pouring out. James handed her tissues and just sat quietly, letting her get it out of her system. "I'm so scared," she whispered. "He's all I have. If something happens to him—" "Nothing is going to happen to him," James said firmly. "David is strong and he's getting the best possible care." After about an hour, Dr. Rodriguez came out to update them. "Mrs. Peterson? David is stable. The CT scan shows some swelling in his brain, but nothing that requires immediate surgery. We're going to keep him overnight for observation, but his vital signs are good." Linda felt like she could breathe again for the first time in hours. "And his arm? The orthopedic surgeon is setting it now. It was a clean break, so it should heal completely. David is awake and asking for you." When Linda saw David in his hospital bed, he looked so small and fragile, surrounded by all the medical equipment. But his eyes were clear and focused, and he managed a weak smile when he saw her. "Hi, Mom. Dr. Carter, are you still here?" "I wanted to make sure you were okay," James replied, walking over to the bed. "How are you feeling?" "My head still hurts, but not as bad. And my arm feels weird, but they said that's normal because of the medicine." Linda took David's good hand and squeezed it gently. "You scared me so much, honey." "I'm sorry, Mom. I know I shouldn't have tried to jump the creek. It was stupid." "We'll talk about making better choices later," Linda said, smiling through her tears. "Right now, I'm just glad you're okay." James stayed for another hour, checking on David periodically and helping Linda understand what the doctors were telling her. When it became clear that David was stable and going to be fine, James finally prepared to leave. "Dr. Carter," David called out as James reached the door. "Thank you for saving me." "You're very welcome, David, but remember, no more bike stunts, okay?" David grinned sheepishly. Okay, I promise. Linda walked James out to the hospital lobby. She had been trying to find the right words to say, but everything seemed inadequate. James, I don't know how to thank you for what you did today. You saved David's life. Any doctor would have done the same thing, Linda. No, she said, stopping and looking at him directly. Any doctor might have helped, but not every neighbor would have. Not after what I did to you. James was quiet for a moment, and Linda wondered if she had said too much. But then he spoke, and his voice was gentle. Linda, when I saw David lying there hurt, I didn't think about our past. I didn't think about anything except helping a child who needed medical attention. That's what doctors do, and that's what neighbors should do for each other. But I called the police on you. I made assumptions about you that were wrong and hurtful. I understand if you can't forgive that. James looked at her with something that might have been surprise. Linda, I forgave you weeks ago. Today just proved what I already suspected, that you're a good person who made a mistake based on fear, not hatred. Linda felt tears starting again. I don't deserve your kindness. Everyone deserves kindness. Linda, that's what I'm trying to teach my daughter, that we judge people by their actions, not their appearances or mistakes. As they said goodbye in the hospital parking lot, Linda realized that this day had changed everything. She had seen James at his very best, when the stakes were highest and when he had every reason to walk away. Instead, he had shown her what true character looked like. More than that, she had learned something important about herself. When her child was in danger, none of the things she thought mattered actually mattered at all. The only thing that counted was having someone skilled and compassionate enough to help. Driving home alone while David stayed overnight for observation, Linda thought about how she was going to tell this story to others, how she was going to explain that the man she had once called the police on had turned out to be exactly the person she needed most when her world fell apart. She realized that she had a choice to make. She could quietly appreciate James's help and go back to her old assumptions about people who looked different from her. Or she could use this experience to become a better person, someone who saw others the way James had seen her today, with compassion and the benefit of the doubt. As she pulled into her driveway and saw James's house across the street, Linda knew which choice she was going to make. David came home from the hospital the next evening with his left arm in a bright blue cast and strict instructions to take it easy for the next few weeks. He was still a little shaky on his feet, but the doctor said that was normal and would improve over the next few days. Linda had never been so grateful to have her son home safe. The first thing David wanted to do was thank Dr. Carter properly. Despite Linda's concerns about bothering their neighbor, David insisted they go over right away. Lucy answered the door and immediately started asking David questions about his cast and whether it hurt, and if he could still play video games. James appeared behind his daughter, smiling when he saw David up and walking around. Hey there, how are you feeling? Much better, thanks to you, David replied. Mom says you saved my life. I just did what any doctor would do. I'm glad you're okay. Lucy tugged on her dad's shirt. Dad, can David come over and play? I want to sign his cast, James laughed. I think David needs to rest for a few more days before he does any playing. But maybe you can visit with him for a little while. While the kids settled in the living room with Lucy carefully writing her name on David's cast, Linda and James sat in the kitchen. Linda had been thinking about this conversation all night at the hospital and during the drive home. James, I need to say something and I need you to really hear me. James nodded, giving her his full attention. What happened yesterday made me realize how wrong I was about you from the very beginning. Not just wrong about you as a person, but wrong about how I see people in general. I called the police on you because I was scared of someone I didn't know. And if I'm being honest, because you're black and I made assumptions based on that. James appreciated her directness, even though the conversation was uncomfortable. I've been thinking a lot about why I reacted that way, Linda continued. And I realized that I've been living in a bubble where I don't really interact with people who are different from me. I told myself I wasn't racist because I don't use bad words or treat people badly on purpose. But when it mattered, when I had to decide whether to trust or fear someone, I chose fear. Linda, a lot of people struggle with unconscious bias. The important thing is recognizing it and working to change. But here's what really gets me, Linda said, her voice getting stronger. You had every right to hold that against me. You had every right to say no when I asked for help. Instead, you dropped everything to save David's life. You showed me kindness I didn't deserve." James was quiet for a moment, listening to David and Lucy laugh in the next room. "You know, Linda, I've experienced situations like ours before. People making assumptions, crossing the street when they see me, watching me extra carefully in stores. It used to make me really angry. It should make you angry. It's not fair. Maybe. But I learned that carrying anger around only hurts me. It doesn't change other people's minds or make the world better for Lucy. What changes people's minds is getting to know each other as real people, not as whatever stereotypes we might have." Linda looked at James with new respect. She was beginning to understand that his kindness wasn't just natural goodness. It was a choice he made every day, despite having reasons to be bitter or defensive. Over the next few weeks, as David recovered, the two families spent more and more time together. Linda and James discovered they both loved old movies, and they started having movie nights with the kids. David taught Lucy how to play chess, while she helped him with art projects he could do with one good arm. But Linda didn't stop at just becoming friends with James. She started paying attention to how other neighbors treated him and Lucy. She noticed that some people were polite but distant. Others seemed to actively avoid them. A few were openly unfriendly, especially Mrs. Henderson from down the street, who had made several comments about those people moving into the neighborhood. One Saturday afternoon, Linda was working in her front yard when she overheard Mrs. Henderson talking to another neighbor. "Mrs. Chen, I heard there was quite a commotion last week," Mrs. Henderson was saying. "Police cars, ambulances. I'm not surprised considering who lives across from the Petersons now." Linda felt her blood boil. She walked over to where the two women were standing. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing. If you're talking about Dr. Carter, I think you should know that he saved my son's life last week." Mrs. Henderson looked uncomfortable but didn't back down. "Well, I'm sure he's a nice enough man, but you have to admit, the neighborhood has changed since he moved in." "Yes, it has changed," Linda replied firmly. "It's become a place where a skilled pediatric surgeon lives. A place where someone would drop everything to help a neighbor in crisis. I'd say that's a pretty good change." Mrs. Chen looked embarrassed. "Linda, I don't think we meant anything bad by it. Maybe not. But words matter. Dr. Carter is one of the best neighbors I've ever had. And his daughter Lucy is a sweet kid who deserves to feel welcome here." After that conversation, Linda realized she had a choice. She could quietly enjoy her friendship with James and Lucy, while letting other people continue to make unfair assumptions. Or she could use her position as a longtime neighborhood resident to help change attitudes. She chose to speak up. When the neighborhood book club met at her house the following month, Linda suggested they read a book about racial justice. When Mrs. Henderson made another comment about neighborhood changes at the homeowners association meeting, Linda publicly praised James for his community involvement and medical expertise. Most importantly, Linda made sure that Lucy was included in neighborhood activities. When she organized a block party for the 4th of July, she personally invited James and Lucy and made sure other families knew how welcome they were. James noticed Linda's efforts and appreciated them, though he never asked her to be his advocate. One evening, as they watched their kids play in his backyard, he mentioned it. "You know, you don't have to defend us to everyone, Linda." "Yes, I do," Linda replied without hesitation. "Not because you need me to, but because it's the right thing to do. I was part of the problem before. Now I want to be part of the solution." "What do you mean?" Linda thought about how to explain it. "I realize that staying quiet when people say unfair things is almost as bad as saying those things myself. If I really believe you and Lucy deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, then I need to speak up when others don't treat you that way." James smiled. "Lucy is lucky to have you looking out for her. David and I are the lucky ones. We got to learn what real courage and character look like." 6 months after the bike accident, Oakwood Hills had indeed changed, but not in the way Mrs. Henderson had feared. James had become the neighborhood's unofficial medical consultant, always willing to answer questions or look at minor injuries. Lucy had a group of friends who loved coming over to play in her backyard. Most importantly, several neighbors had followed Linda's example and made an effort to get to know James and Lucy as individuals, rather than making assumptions based on appearance. David's arm healed perfectly, and he kept his promise about not attempting any more dangerous bike stunts. But he learned something more valuable than bike safety from his accident. He learned that the best neighbors are the ones who show up when you need them most, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. Linda learned that changing your mind about your own biases is just the beginning. Real change happens when you're willing to speak up and help others see past their assumptions too. And James learned that sometimes taking a chance on difficult neighbors can lead to the strongest friendships. His kindness in Linda's moment of crisis hadn't just saved David's life. It had opened hearts and minds throughout the neighborhood. On a warm evening in late summer, as both families sat on James's back porch watching their kids play, Linda reflected on how much had changed since that first morning when she called the police. "You know," she said to James, "I think this turned out to be the best mistake I ever made." James looked at her curiously. "How can calling the police on someone be a good mistake?" Linda smiled. "Because it led to this. It led to David and Lucy being best friends. It led to us becoming family. And most importantly, it taught me how to be a better person." "I don't think it was the mistake that did all that," James replied thoughtfully. "I think it was your willingness to admit the mistake and learn from it. That's what made the difference." Looking at their children playing together, both parents realized they were watching the future, a generation that would see neighbors as neighbors, friends as friends, and people as people, regardless of what they looked like or where they came from. It had taken a crisis to bring them together, but now they were building something lasting. They were building the kind of community where everyone belonged, where everyone was valued, and where everyone showed up for each other when it mattered most. And it all started with one person being brave enough to knock on a door, swallow their pride, and ask for help from someone they had wronged. Sometimes the best changes in life begin with the hardest conversations and the most difficult admissions, but they always begin with someone choosing to be better than they were before.